Well, we will cross over to Russia with an extremely disturbing story in development in one of the Russian provinces, Chechnya. The growing evidence of evidence body of mass targeting, killings, and even executions, extrajudicial executions of gay people in Chechnya, in particular in Grozny, were exposed this week. Well, first of all, it started with a story of Novaya Gazeta, which is Russian leading independent newspaper. They exposed actually secret prison run in Grozny, where dozens, if not hundreds, of men who were suspected as gay people were illegally detained, tortured, and executed for sometimes weeks or months. Well, This is I want to bring your attention to a recent story, a second story, follow-up story from Radio Liberty. They actually uncovered a second torture place in Grozny with a lot of growing evidence, witness accounts about that place. If we can run a quote from a member of the Russian LGBT Network and prominent Russian human rights activist who talked to Russian Hromadske a bit earlier this week, explaining a bit of the story.
I'd like to remind you that Chechnya is not legally a sovereign state, and the responsibility for what is going on right now lies with the government of the Russian Federation. The government of the Russian Federation should investigate this. If they don't, it means that this will get referred to other organizations. I emphasize the fact that this is about crimes against humanity, about crimes which should be investigated by the International Criminal Court. If the Russian government both persists denying what is going on and continue showing an unwillingness to investigate this crime properly, then it needs to be investigated in The Hague.
We also talked to the reporter from Novaya Gazeta, who actually, she was the first who exposed the story and published the story. She told Hromadske earlier this week how she obtained that information because there is a lot of confusion about it. Take a look.
How do you know about the secret prisons, and what do you know about the location of those prisons? How did you get this information, and what can you do with it now?
Firstly, our newspaper has been working in Chechnya for 25 years, and we have our sources. It will be unacceptable for us to identify these sources, but we trust them. It is risky for them to feed us this information. Different people have come to us. Some of them were released from prison and are already safe with their families in Europe. They tell us things from there. They also take the risk to put a stop to what is going on, or to make it known. But they want to do this so it is made public.
Well, it's obvious one of the biggest stories in the region, and quite disturbing development, especially when you read into those accounts of people who were detained.
Absolutely. And you know, what is interesting for me is that after the story was published, then one of the Russian LGBT rights organizations started the campaign to receive letters from people in Chechnya, mostly gay people, who would send their stories. And then it actually caused, you know, the whole wave of stories from Chechnya, from gay people in Chechnya, which I think continues, you know, this interesting reaction of the Chechen government, which tries to claim that, you know, they don't have gay people in their region, which is kind of nonsense. I've read one of these stories, and you know what's interesting for me is that I feel like there is lack of understanding of Islam as well, which is going on in Chechnya, and this is quite an interesting angle, because which would be quite a typical story for a region like Chechnya, is that one of the people who wrote a letter, and his letter was published at several media outlets, he describes, you know, this interesting conflict that he had, internal conflict of being a Muslim and a gay at the same time.
Well, it's true, but at the same time, one of the things that people don't understand about Chechnya and about this expose about tortures and killings of gay people, that it's actually a fraction of a regular process, because we've seen so many statements before, years before, about the Kadyrov regime under the auspices of the government in the Kremlin, conduct a massive campaign of actually illegally detaining, torturing, and killing those who are, not in line with the government policy there in Chechnya.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and it has nothing to do with Islam. That's kind of one of the most important points, because this is just used as an excuse by Chechen authorities, and as quite often, like I read recently one comment which kind of shocked me, and it's a popular opinion in my country, for example, that Kadyrov is great because he won a war against terrorism, and I'm like, are you serious? Like, Kadyrov is a terrorism that won, That's kind of how I see what's going on there. And this is just one of these examples of what's going on.
That's great that you mentioned that hotline that Russian LGBT network set up to kind of try to get more information about what is happening in Chechnya, because it's so hard for even people inside Chechnya to speak out because it's a very closed community. I talked to Svetlana Zakharova from Russian LGBT network a bit earlier, and she actually tried to explain what they are trying to do right now, how they try to help people inside Chechnya, LGBT people, and most importantly, what they expect from international community when it comes to pressure and help. Take a listen. Svetlana, thanks for joining us. Let's from the start clarify a couple of things about the facts of detention and murders, because I know that there's still a lot of confusion, not only among the general public back in Europe or in the States, but also even among LGBT organizations. They still are confused whether or not those facts about detentions and killings are confirmed. What do you know specifically at this point, what we can confirm when it comes to this disturbing development in Chechnya?
Well, we can confirm for sure that the kidnappings, killings, and tortures are happening in Chechnya. And basically people who survived such things, or whose friends missing, or whose friends survived such things, they're already contacting us and asking for help. And they're telling really horrible stories about what's going on.
Svetlana, can you actually give us a clearer perspective on with these murders and killings happening in Chechnya, whether or not it has been happening for a while, because Chechnya is a repressive region, and we've been having a lot of reports from about human rights violations there, or why is it suddenly on the spot? Is it really a recent development when it comes to torture and killings of particularly gay Chechens?
Well, Chechnya always was a specific region, and LGBT people were always persecuted there, but I believe that this is the first time when there is such a mass campaign. About the reasons why, I don't know why it's happening. We don't know why, but we believe that the main question is not why this is happening now, but why the government doesn't react at all, and why the investigative committee and all other responsible authorities, they don't do what they're really supposed to do.
Well, I want to give you a bit of a quote from ILGA Europe, which is a leading European LGBT organization, and they put out a statement about the situation in Chechnya. They say, "We strongly urge the international community to use any means it has to defend victims of detentions. The Russian authorities must end these horrific abuses of the human rights of gay, bisexual men. The victims must be urgently released from illegal detention camps where they live in terrible conditions, being subjected to brutal beatings and torture." Once again, what is realistic when it comes to the response of the international community, in your opinion? Because obviously there is no possibility at this moment to directly intervene and help those people in Chechnya. What do you expect, what could realistically be done on behalf of the international community at this point?
Well, we believe that it's quite realistic to protest against those events, to spread the information about those events, to ask the governments and diplomatic missions to press the Russian governments, and again to do what they're really supposed to do. Because it's, Chechnya is a very specific and closed region, but it's still part of Russia. And at some point, Russian citizens are killed, tortured, and beaten to death. And there is absolutely no reaction, and it's just unbelievable. And we think that an international pressure can really make the Russian authorities investigate this information and stop killings.
We still felt that this story is not sufficiently covered in English language media. Therefore, Hromadske International is keeping up with the coverage of killings and tortures of gay people in Chechnya. And we, to close this segment, we want to run a couple of quotes from witness accounts of those people who called to hotlines or shared their stories with Russian independent journalists. Take a listen.
They regularly brought me in, beat me, tried to shock me, mock me and humiliate me. They wanted me to give up the names of other gay people. After the beatings, I would stay with friends for a day or two, wait for the bruises to fade a bit, only then would I go home. I'd tell my family that I'd gotten into a fight. It went on like that for 2 years. The beatings begin as soon as you're brought in. The electric shocks, being beaten with plastic pipes. They only ever hit us below the waist, on our legs, hips, bum, waist. They said that we were dogs, which have no right to life. They forced the other prisoners to mock us. They put us in 2 rows facing each other, a few dozen people. They handed out these sticks that looked like bats. Everyone had to walk through this formation. 3 or 4 sticks were hard to bear. It really hurt. And after 20, you can't bear it at all. I did not know how to deal with the pain, and I always thought I had a fairly high pain threshold. To try and combat the pain from the torture, I gnawed at my hands until they bled.